Okay. The next section is on the IANA Stewardship Transition Planning Process. And I have slides. I should have changed the title. So I'd like to get started talking about what's happening with the IANA changes. The first part of this talk I actually gave earlier, and it was during NANOG, I gave them a quick introduction to what's happening with the IANA. I'm now going to continue that and add some more slides regarding the ARIN specific process. So first to note, IANA, Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. Throughout the entire history, the Internet system has employed a central Internet IANA Assigned Numbers Authority. IANA handles three central registries: the names, i.e. the DNS root zone, the numbers, IPv4, IPv6, and ASN free pools, and the protocol parameters. Actually, it's sort of interesting. The DNS root zone is only one registry, if you think about it. IPv4, IPv6, 32 and 34-bit ASNs are four registries. Protocol parameters, there's nearly 1,000 protocol parameter registries. Your BGP option numbers are in a protocol registry. Your port numbers are in a protocol registry. Nearly every internet RFC that has a protocol has an IANA consideration section that creates an Internet Protocol Parameters registry. So numerically, the majority of registries managed by the IANA are from the IETF, and they're the result of Internet drafts. So this is a very important function, particularly for the IETF, to have an accurate registry of option numbers and port numbers, protocol fields. It is very important to us because the IANA manages the unallocated pools for number resources and ASN numbers. And of course, the IANA also updates the DNS root zone, which some people are interested in. And so while the number of registries are actually weighted towards the IETF, the political visibility might be in the opposite order. A lot of people pay more attention to the DNS root zone than all the other things that IANA does. The U.S. government announced a plan to transition oversight of the IANA functions contract from NTIA to the global multi-stakeholder community. Currently, the IANA operates under two arrangements. One is the IANA functions contract issued by the Department of Commerce, its NTIA agency, to ICANN, and under that contract, ICANN performs the IANA functions. There's also an MOU with the IETF, and under that MOU between the IETF and ICANN, ICANN performs the IANA functions. The NTIA conditions for this transition of its authority, its stewardship, to the internet community is that they want a proposal from the community. And that proposal should support and enhance the multi-stakeholder model, maintain security, stability, and resiliency of the internet DNS. You know, that phrase internet DNS, when NTIA uses the phrase internet DNS, they actually mean the entire system, names, numbers, and protocols and parameters. I actually had to ask this directly to get it clarified. So maintain the security, stability, and resiliency of all the IANA functions. Meets and needs expectations of the global customers and partners of the IANA services. Global customers and partners of the IANA services. So IANA has a customer in the IETF who sends it RFCs and with IANA consideration sections. It has a customer in the RIRs. We develop global policy, have it ratified by ICANN, send it to IANA for them to implement in managing those. And then, of course, ICANN itself is a customer in terms of the administration of the root zone. And maintain the openness of the internet. So those are the NTIA conditions. We, the global community, have to put together a proposal that meets that set of requirements. Oh yeah, one little detail. US government NTIA will not accept any government-based proposal. It cannot be purely government-based, is identified in the questions and answers as an unacceptable answer. Now, it's challenging to put together a proposal, particularly when it has to come from, quote, the entire internet community. And so to do this, ICANN was asked to facilitate the process and act as a secretariat to the community. And the proposal that was floated and adopted was that there would be an IANA Stewardship Transition Coordination Group, which actually is going to have 30 people, several from the ASO, our Address Supporting Organization, and IETF, and the IAB, and SSAC, and RSAC, and ALAC. And for those of you familiar with ICANN, some of those terms are familiar: the GAC, the GNSO, the GTLD registries, the CSCNSO. Pretty much everyone's got a couple of seats at the table. This 30-person group has to develop a proposal for NTIA's consumption. The proposal has to meet these criteria, and it has to handle how stewardship is provided for these IANA functions, absent US government doing its contracting. Now, stewardship's an interesting word. It doesn't mean this group has to come up with a proposal to do those tasks. It has to come up with a proposal so that those tasks are being done with appropriate oversight and accountability. The RIRs, the DNS community, the folks at the IETF have generally indicated support that ICANN is doing an adequate job as the IANA. In fact, the specific leaders of those organizations, we actually issued a statement several months back where we said we believe the ICANN is doing a good job as the IANA. We like it to continue. That helps support the stability aspects. But we'd still need to put together a proposal as to how the oversight and accountability of that is being done, how the stewardship is being transitioned from the US government to the community. So we have this coordination group, and it has to put together a plan, and the plan has to come from the community, which means we need lots of pieces to come from different areas. Obviously, how numbers are handled, how names are handled, how internet protocol parameters are handled, are all going to come from their respective communities, and this team is going to have the enviable job of assembling that together. Its mission: to coordinate the development of a proposal among the communities affected by the IANA functions. As a charter online, you can go look at it. It has several meetings. Its meetings are open. You can participate in the teleconference and listen to them discuss things. They're trying to make sure they do a thorough framework on how they're going to get this job done, but it's a very difficult job. Now, there's a graphic here, and this is an exciting graphic because it points out a couple of things. One of the things it points out is that the IANA contract expires on 30 September 2015. If we're going to have a proposal in front of NTIA so that NTIA doesn't have to continue the contract in any way, it has to be there months before that. Recognize that once NTIA gets this proposal, it's not as if one guy is going to take out a pen and sign it and say, good job. There may be other parts of the US government that want to comment or consider the implications of this. So while it says September, realistically, the sooner we put this proposal together, the more realistic it is that it can actually be considered. And these are a rough idea of the steps involved, and this includes putting together a proposed framework, which we've done, the community working on a proposal, it going from the team, going back out to the community for more input, and iterating. We expect it's going to take a few iterations. And think about you have a central team assembling a central proposal out of component proposals, which are going to come from the RIRs and IETF and ICANN's communities, plus additional inputs. They've said specifically they're open to additional inputs. So we have to try to get all of this together into one document and actually have it represent the community's view. I will tell you, this is going to be a challenge. In the RIRs, each of the RIRs has kicked off a process for how it's going to get its input that will be used with the other RIR's input to build the RIR submission to the coordination group. So you can go look at these websites, AFRINIC, APNIC, ARIN, LACNIC, and RIPE. The ARIN one doesn't say much. A lot of people said, yeah, there's pretty good processes in all the regions except for ARIN. Well, yeah, we didn't want to set the process on how we're going to do it without talking to you first. But we will quickly update once we've had this discussion with the community and set the process for this region. But it wouldn't be appropriate for staff to do that on your behalf. There are going to be some upcoming meetings. So our meeting is kind of right here, and we're going to have this discussion. But this topic will be at each one of these RIR meetings as they try to develop their input. We're probably not going to have another meeting between now and the next ARIN meeting. We're probably not going to have enough time to get another face-to-face of everyone here. So we're going to work predominantly by a mailing list basis, because we probably have to have our input to the other RIRs by November or December so that it can be harmonized into one input by January or February. And so we have to do a lot of our work by email. Some of these other RIRs may have a chance to do a face-to-face ratification of what they submit. We unfortunately won't have that luxury. So on the ICG process, not the RIR process, not ARIN's process, but on the overall ICG process, are there any questions? I have a lot more slides, but I'm taking a pause now on just the framework that's been set up to develop a policy proposal. So on the ICG coordination group, its charter, any questions? Yes, Kevin.
Kevin Bloomberg. Very quick question. There was all of the organizations that were mentioned
Yep.
that were a part of this process. Is there anybody outside of that process, i.e. if you are an individual, would you then have to go through one of those organizations, or are they looking at direct involvement?
So there's a great question there. All of us are trying to keep our processes open so you could participate through any one of the communities. But in theory, this process is supposed to be open to everyone. ICG, to my knowledge, hasn't made a clear way of you submitting input. There is a mailing list. In theory, your input would get considered. But I will tell you that your input would have a lot more weight if you worked through the cross-community working group in ICANN or the RIR community and get your thoughts on that, because it's going to be hard enough taking the directly affected communities and combining their output with one individual contribution on the side if you were to make it. If you can actually get momentum in ARIN or momentum in the RIRs, your input would have a lot more chance of surviving the process when everything is lashed together into one. So ICG, in theory, is open to input. There's no process I know of other than to send it to the mailing list. Does that help? Okay. Milton, actually, I'm going to put you on the spot since you're at the mic. Do you know if ICG is open to any input other than through the mailing list?
Well, that's why I'm here at the mic, is because you're asking questions about the ICG, and you're not on the ICG, and I
Right.
am. So I thought maybe I should be
That would be
answering some of
great,
these
actually.
questions. Okay, so I think you didn't quite emphasize strongly enough the extent to which the ICG does not develop the proposal. The proposal process development has been divided into three parts: numbers, names, and protocols. There is a well-established process underway through the IETF for protocols. There is one for names that is just launched. And there, as far as we can tell from the ICG, there is not an integrated RIR process.
Right.
To directly answer Kevin's question, we actually have addressed this in an FAQ that I think will be released in Los Angeles. But the point is, we're putting all of our emphasis on these operational communities to convene a broad and open process. Okay, it's not just for people who are part of the RIRs. It should be open to anybody. Now, of course, when it comes to the numbers root, or whatever that is, not a lot of random people will be interested in that, but the process, from our point of view, does need to be open. Mm-hmm. And if Kevin goes and sends us an email that says, I think you should do this in the numbers space, all we're going to do is send it to whatever process the RIRs eventually put together and say to Kevin, we have submitted your ideas to the relevant people, but don't complain to us, because we're not like the decider who says, oh, I like this proposal, I don't like that one, let's mix these two together. We are simply there to assemble the completed proposals, check them for consensus, consistency, accountability, and then package them together and send them to ICANN for transmission to the NTIA. That has to be
Excellent.
very well understood, that we are not sitting there to receive proposals and decide among them.
Right.
It has to take place at these 3 communities.
That's very helpful. So, Kevin, to re-answer your question, I'm glad we have Milton, who is actually on this coordination group, and I look forward to the FAQ, which would help as well. They're taking the input based on the subject matter areas from those respective processes, and there's an obligation on those individual areas to be most open to input, not just from their own communities, but to the public at large. So that's why the other point is that to date, there has not been a stated process for how the RIRs are going to assemble their input. And obviously, if someone completely outside the RIR community wants to submit something, they need to know that process pretty quickly. So that's something that my talk continues on. Bo, the answer is, if you are not part of this community, you should put your input to the respective process based on what it's about. If you're talking about numbers, make sure it gets into this community, make sure it gets in the process in this community. If you also have input about the names or the protocol parameters, make sure it gets into the IETF process, because it's going to be handled on a topical basis, if I understand you correctly, Milton. And you folks aren't doing, I think it's very clear, the ICG is assembling and helping clarify how these proposals knit together. They're not creating anything. You're the coordination team. Okay. So now you have a question, Milton.
No, no.
No, you were just answering.
I'll stay here in case you need me.
Oh, well, that's good. Go ahead. Front mic.
Matt Petak.
I need you always, Milton. Stay right there. Yes.
Matt Petak, Yahoo. Just to be clear, from the NTIA's perspective, the ICG is not the sole arbiter of proposals. The ICG is bringing one proposal to the table, but a collection of commercial entities could band together and put a competing or a collection of competing proposals in front of the NTIA as well.
So I don't speak for NTIA any more than I speak for the ICG. Obviously, the NTIA is an agency. It's open to input from a lot of different sources. I can't imagine them saying, no, we won't listen, if a group of commercial organizations were to do that. So I expect that's the case. I haven't seen a FAQ that answers that from them, but there's no reason while this process is going on, people can't talk to them.
Well, mainly from the point of view of, if people are concerned about the ICG not being open to inputs in the way they desire, do recognize that this is not the only path. This is what we would like to see as everybody coming together, but if we don't do a good job of bringing everyone together, everyone has choices of other ways of bringing it to the NTIA.
Right. Milton, you want to respond, and then I'll take the back microphone.
I wouldn't want to encourage you to hold that view. I think the NTIA has made it clear. They said, we want ICANN to convene a process. ICANN created this, and they are expecting a proposal from the ICG. If you don't like what the ICG puts together, then there will be a public comment period at the end of our process in which you can band together, and if like 16 major internet corporations all say we hate this, then I think the NTIA might give us the proposal back and say keep working. But I'm pretty sure they do not want a bunch of people coming through back channels. I don't think anybody wants that, and saying, oh, here's what you really want to do. You just had this big public process, global process to fool everybody, and now really what we're doing is a bunch of American companies are approaching the Commerce Department behind the scenes and coming up with their own proposal. I think that would be a bad losing situation for everybody.
Thank you for clarifying that then.
Yeah, good clarification. Yes, back microphone.
Hi, yes, my name is Ashley Hunt. I'm with NTIA, and I just wanted to concur with what Milton said. We have tasked ICANN to kind of shepherd this process, and the vehicle that they are now working through is the ICG, and we are expecting one proposal, so please make our lives easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that's very clear then. All right, let me continue then. So obviously the process that we use in the RIRs is pretty important, and the process we use in the ARIN region. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ARIN region. Let's go about the RIRs first. The RIRs executives are getting together, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to collate 5 regions, individual inputs into one. We will come up with a process. It's likely to be a process that involves, it's going to have to be on very short order because by the time you guys develop something for this region, the ICG will be anxiously awaiting for it. But we're going to need to also have community involvement in that, so we'll probably have some sort of process to pick some people and have an editorial group that assembles the proposal and gets back to each RIR and says, when we assembled them, here's what fit and here's what didn't. So you're going to actually see, no matter how we try to do the same thing the ICG is doing at the RIR level, we're not going to create anything new. It's going to come back to each RIR as, here's what didn't work, we need to increment this. In the ARIN region, we're going to be doing this on a mailing list, and you're going to have to be involved in that mailing list, the open mailing list. You're going to have to be involved in that mailing list so that when the RIRs try to stitch this all together and we get the feedback on what works and what doesn't, that you can be responsive. So I'm going to talk about the ARIN process. We still do not have a defined inter-RIR process. We're working very aggressively on getting a straw man out on how we're going to do that. But I want to talk about how we get the input from this region to put into the 5 RIR process. So in the ARIN region, we sent out a consultation. I sent an announcement out earlier, about a week ago. We indicated that we're going to open up a consultation on the mailing list from October 13th to October 27th. We want to conduct a survey of the community on how they feel on certain topics to help with drafting the position from this region. Because right now we can get a bunch of people on the mailing list, but in some ways you want to know where are all of you sitting, not who can send the most email in any 24-hour period. So one of the most important questions is, what do we ask you? What do we poll the community? And so we're going to hear a little bit about that. We want to conduct a survey next week to get your positions that would be used to draft this document, and I'll talk about the questions. After we get that, we'll very quickly turn around and we'll post the survey results to the same consultation mailing list. People will have time to discuss them. We'll start working on individual sections of text based on the survey response and based on the dialogue on the list. We will try to put a draft of summary, an initial submission document, back out to the list by November 3rd. Moving on very short time frames because we have to get this integrated with the other RIRs. And then we would have ongoing discussion to make sure everyone's happy with the submission before we sent it to the other RIRs. So it is a process that involves a survey next week on a particular list of questions, and then 2 weeks of online writing and editing, trying to get particular paragraphs done, with a final document the first week of November for everyone to say, that's a good submission from this region. Now again, I want to set the right expectations. This is probably an 80-20 rule or a 90-10 rule, because what we send in to the other RIRs will not match what they do. So we don't need to worry about sentence fragments necessarily, because we're going to get conceptual alignment before we get a final document. We have to get something that's understandable in terms of bullet points and positions, and that will be, you'll get to see how that gets merged with the other RIRs, and then we'll come back to the same mailing list. Now, this is the proposed process. It's the only thing we can't come up with that gets something that really is from the region, the people who are interested in this region, whether you're ARIN members, not ARIN members, interested third parties, whatever, but still does it in a timely manner. I have questions, and my questions are, does the process work? Is that a process that you think is reasonable? Are any changes needed? Recognizing the requirements to get this done in an open fashion from the ARIN region and get it done promptly. My question is mailing list. What mailing list do we use? Some of the mailing lists are closed, like ARIN Discuss, okay? Some of the mailing lists are open, but unpopulated or lightly populated, like the ARIN Consult mailing list, though available to anyone who's interested. And then there's mailing lists that are fully populated and already have other topics on them, like PPML. And so that's one of the good questions we need to talk about. And then Another one is we intend to conduct a survey, and there's some survey questions. I'm going to hold off on the survey questions. I want to know about the process I've outlined, this process, with bullets 1, 1, 1, and 1. Thank you. Huh. And is that process sufficient? And do we need a dedicated mailing list? And how should that mailing list be populated? And microphones are open. On the topic of the mailing list and the 4-1 process. You're fastest. Go ahead, Matt.
All right, Matt Petak, Yahoo. I would propose we actually open a new mailing list just to not pollute existing ones, and that way we can make it as open to as many people as possible. Thank you.
Okay. New mailing list, not pre-populated, but open to everyone.
No, announce the new mailing list on existing ones as broadly as possible, but do not pre-populate.
Okay, thank you. Back microphone, middle microphone, Milton.
Go ahead, Jason. No, go ahead. All right. So, well, my problem is I'm going to challenge your whole paradigm here.
Excellent.
As you know, I don't think there should be regional processes, separate regional processes. I think that, first of all, is a limitation on the openness of the process, that it will stifle the discussion, that people will not get exposed to views. The IANA is a single thing, and the relationship that the RIRs have to the IANA is a uniform thing. It's not like in the end, APNIC is going to have a different IANA than ARIN, right? So you're all talking about the same topic. You should have a global mailing list, and it should be open to anybody interested in the topic. It should be open to anybody from any region. The process of developing regional positions and then filtering them into a negotiated global position, I view as being a little bit too easily to manipulate in a top-down way. I think it should be worked out openly and transparently by everybody involved at the same time. And I just don't think that you can do this, have separate regional processes and then integrating them into a global process in the time frame that we have. I just don't see the need for a regional process here.
Can I ask a couple of questions of clarification? So what we're proposing to do is extremely similar to what ICG is proposing to do, and I'm trying to figure out why it is that it's possible for the ICG to do it.
No, it's not. It's like if the ICG had said, let's ask every one of ICANN's 5 regions to develop a proposal, and then have names and numbers community develop a proposal, and then have us sort them out. Furthermore, you guys are developing the proposal at the top level. We are not developing proposals. We are receiving proposals. So we want, I mean, there's only one IANA for the address structure, right? There's not 5 different IANAs. Why don't you get together and all decide what you want the IANA to be, how you want it to be structured?
Okay, I'm gonna note one more question just to understand. So it's very difficult for the ARIN meeting here, even if this room were to jump up and cheer, let's have a global process. There's 4 other RIRs that have to agree to have a global process rather than regional processes. So I'm just logistically, I'm going to note the challenge. That's not to say I'm not up to it, if that's, but we lose time if we do it and we don't converge on a global process.
But if you think it's hard to agree on whether to have a global process, how hard do you think it will to get them all 5 to agree on what the IANA proposal should be?
Not time. I'm saying it could be easily just the time it requires to agree or not agree. I think it's a very straightforward process to ask all the RIRs. My fear is that in the time it takes to get a straightforward no thank you, we will have lost time. Let me ask one more question just to understand. Do you want a global process at the end? Because once the RIRs have individual submissions, a global mailing list, and using those as input to the list but allowing any other inputs, would give you the global discussion, and it would just give you 5 straw mans to start. Is that sufficient for the openness and the getting back to one process that you're looking for?
No, I don't see the point of that. I think
Okay.
you want you don't want to bring strawmans that your staff and your people are committed to into the process. You want everybody to negotiate with everybody else as to what the proposal should be.
Okay, got it. Very clear position. For a moment, I'd like the people at the queues to step to the side if they're not responding to Milton's question. Milton's raised a very clear query about having a global single process rather than 5 regional processes. I'm looking for responses on that. Yes, Andrew.
Andrew Dahl on the RNAC. I support Milton's idea that we need a global process here. I'm trying to understand how we got to having 5 processes to start with, because obviously there was some conversation that had to have happened to say we're going to go separate ways rather than try to do this together, because there is one submission to the ICG in the end. So if anyone could illuminate how we started with 5, that might be helpful, but if there's no real answer to that, I still believe we need one process. I would, given the time constraints, I think I would be okay with the 5 straw man into the process idea and then having a global discussion about the actual submission. I definitely don't want to have the submission go back to 5 regions and be discussed separately. That just sounds ridiculous to me.
So let me just fill in a data point because you asked a specific question. In the case of the IETF, you have a single organization, okay? And so it's pretty easy to have a single organizational process. In the case of the RIRs, you have 5 RIRs which have clear communities, meetings, and have a validity. The NRO is the union of the 5 executives as a coordination, but you don't want the NRO running a single process. It's not a community-based organization. It's an association of 5 RIRs. And so it was felt it wouldn't be valid to run a single process, which was just whoever spoke loudest on the mailing list, when we all have meetings that allow face-to-face dialogue. So very quickly, the NRO said, we should have each of our communities consider this and submit, and we'll try to figure out what is in common. That's to answer your data question.
So when you say the NRO quickly considered that, is that the NRO executive committee?
That's the 5 executives, most
Okay,
certainly,
thank
yeah.
you.
Okay, so next response on Milton's question, global.
I would just make an observation that the RIRs and the NRO have a process for deciding global policy with regard to IP address allocation. Why don't we just exercise that same mechanism? It seems to me that's what you've chosen to do, and so I don't agree with Milton in this case. I think that we should use the mechanisms we already have for global development of policy, and then use that same process to come out with whatever the agreement is.
Okay, anyone else wants to respond on that point? We're on the point of global versus regional processes. Jason.
Jason Schiller, Google and ASOAC. I echo a lot of the concerns that Milton brought up, that Andrew echoed, and that Vint echoed. I think we do have precedent for this. We do have a global policy process, and the way that process works is slightly different than what we see here in bullet 1. The difference is primarily that we have individual processes that run in each of the 5 regions where we discuss and try to get to unified text. And if we don't get unified text, the NRO EC can do some rewriting, but then that gets kicked back to the NRO NC to look if there was a substantive change to the policy. And if the rewritten policy is essentially what the communities discussed or not. And if it's not, it gets kicked back down to the communities.
Right.
So I think that's what's really missing here in this ARIN region process in bullet 1, where after all the 5 proposals come in or combined, it sounds like the intention is for this to be an 80-20 thing, that 80% of the 5 proposals will survive, 20% maybe will get lost, and that's what's moved forward. And that can't happen in our global policy process. Right. We had a very, very significant one-word change, must to may,
Yep.
which substantially changed the meaning of a global policy proposal, and that one did not move forward.
So to respond, Jason, just for clarity, I might have misrepresented this. This is only to develop ARIN's initial document. Truly, once we're done, they need to be combined in some manner, and they need to be compared, much like the NRO Number Council does, and responses need to come back to the community about what doesn't compare. We were going to actually try to put together a brief body to do it. We could use the Number Council if that's what people want, but very much the process envisioned, as Vince said, is we do an initial submission, the other four do, and it's exactly the process that's used for global policy. So if that's inappropriate, I need to know.
So it's not clear from on the slide in bullet 1 at the bottom there, that once these things are combined and stuff falls out, that the combined document and the stuff that falls out will be represented to the communities and discussed to try and get further harmonization or approval. And I think
Okay.
we need that step.
Right. This truly is only the ARIN region process, and the RIR-wide one needs to be written, and it's not decided, and I'm looking for input to bring to the other RIRs on how to do that. I got it.
Thank you.
Okay? Other people on the overall global process, should we use a single global process or 5 RIRs merging into one? Yes?
John Springer, John Springer, Inland Telephone, ARIN-AC. The RIR system of the 5 regional registries is in place. The attempt, if we were to all stand up here and go, yay, global process, and Milton didn't have the time or the ability to get to the other RIRs and they all continued on their merry way, it would have the effect of disenfranchising this community's input to the process. So, the RIR system is what we have. The other 4 RIRs have already produced their preliminary documents. We need to proceed as a regional internet registry and produce our preliminary document.
Okay. On the global versus regional process, yes, middle microphone. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm Sheung from Africa. I represent, I'm from the African community. I'm also one of the chairs of the African Policy Development Working Group. I'm sure John would know that I've sent him some personal mails.
Right.
Also to other IR CEOs. Maybe we should actually be discussing with the NRO, because it looks like perhaps when we talk about this globalization, maybe John is not the right person to be responding. I think you're trying to introduce what the community is not used to. We are used to the global policy development process,
Right.
and if there's something that needs to change, then you need to present it to the community. If you're going to change the process, let us know about it. NRO does not decide a process for the community.
Yep.
So I think when you were saying that we don't know how to get we have not yet decided how to get the contents together. It's like, so we are leaving the top and we're just starting from the middle.
Okay.
That is the first thing we should resolve. How do we get the contributions from all the regions? And there is actually a process existing, which is
Right.
the GPDP,
Yes.
which is very, very functional. I don't know why it's difficult to, the GPDP goes to ICANN. It doesn't need to go to ICANN. This is something that involves all the community. So we should go through the GPDP. You said there's going to be a survey. If that survey is going to be used, let us all respond to the survey. Let's use the same format. Let's get this. That is how we can get different views, and that is how we can be effective in all this. I don't understand the fact that we are at this point trying to disconnect ourselves. Please, John, I would really appreciate if the NRO chair could respond to this. And my question is, why are they not using the GPDP process?
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm not the NRO
Yeah,
chair.
it's not a, sorry, excuse me.
Paul is.
Milton just said it's not a policy. Yes, it's not a policy. But this is something that involves all the regions. And so it's global. So it should be treated in the manner with which we are used to. We're used to, within the different communities, we're used to discussing things at global level using the GBDP process. So let's just, if you want to introduce a new process, send it to all the communities and let's agree.
So I can address what I know. I can't speak as the chair of the NRO, but I can say, so the global policy development process for the fastest global policy that went through it took, I'll look for Jason. Jason, what do you think the fastest global policy development process was?
Yeah.
A year and 3 months, I'm thinking? Okay, a year and 3 months on a pretty express path to get something through the regional and global policy development processes. It was felt that if we give our submission to the ICG at the end of 2015, that might be too late for them to do anything with it. So what we wanted to do was hold effectively very abbreviated development processes in each region, convene a number of people. For example, we could take the ASOAC representatives from this region just as the others do, but to call it the policy development process, it would be wrong because we're going to do it on a much accelerated time frame. But something very similar, only on a much shorter time frame, is what the NRO was thinking.
Yeah, but what you're presenting right now is not something similar. What you're presenting right now is something totally different. Because we are doing things in our own silos now. And I fear this may even take more time.
Okay?
We should have, if we're going to get our views from different communities, the NRO should come up with the same questions, survey questions, distribute it to us all. Let's get different views on those specific questions. Not that we have different processes. It doesn't help.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Jason
Senator Front?
Schiller?
Yep.
Jason Schiller, I'd like to respond to your question.
Yes, please do.
So the long pole in the tent here for global policy is we have to get text in front of each of the 5 regions and run through their local policy development process. And that text has to get supported by each of the communities. In all of the regions, that requires a face-to-face meeting.
Right.
So you have to hit at least one face-to-face meeting in every region, which is theoretically possible to do in less than a year.
Right.
I think we've passed a policy proposal in just under a year and a half. It's not uncommon for it to take 2 years.
Right.
It's not uncommon for this community to discuss a local policy and for it to be 2 goes at 2 face-to-face meetings. So that's really a year before this community could have a final product for which the other communities could work with and merge into. So I think it's important to note that this process is a very long process. And I think it's important to note that our time constraints don't support that. I think what would be helpful to some of the people in the room is to show how the process you have here parallels the global policy development process and how it is different and why and I think the major difference here is we can't wait for a face-to-face meeting. So we have to find another way for the community to participate and to find consensus. And I think that's what you've done.
Right.
My personal complaint is that based on my read of the bullets, it doesn't sound like the final product comes back to the community for final ratification.
Right.
And I think with that modification, we have something that is fairly similar to what global policy today looks like.
Okay, thank you. Back microphone?
Yeah.
I'm going to be closing the mics. We have a lot of topics, but I'm going to be closing the mics on the topic of global versus regional processes. Unless you're speaking about global versus regional processes, step back from the mic. Okay, go ahead, back microphone.
Yeah, this is Bill Dart. I'm an ARIN Advisory Council. It just seems to me that the global process is the one that can accommodate the time frame constraints best. However, I think that if there's a way to concentrate across regions on core principles first and then iterate through greater detail, that would perhaps be a
Okay.
tack.
Other remarks on global versus regional? If you have a remark on global process versus regional?
Yes.
Yes, Milton.
Well, if I'm the only one in the queue, I will go ahead if Kevin.
On that topic, global versus
Okay.
regional, go ahead.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
That's fine.
I think the practical constraints on going through a regional bottom-up, the point has been made, I think, particularly by Jason, this is just not viable within the time constraints. The other point I want to address is that it's not a policy we're talking about here. I understand when you're dealing with address allocation policies, there are different regions with different practices and operations that need to be coordinated on a bottom-up basis. We're talking about a global entity, the fate of the IANA, and I think that's a global topic, and we should get together as soon as possible. However, I'm not against the regions having their own consultations and lists. I'm not against that at all. I simply think we need to have a global process in place immediately, and there's nothing stopping us from starting a global list and getting, the other ones to buy into it, or let's just say everybody joins the APNIC list. That seems to have some traffic. I don't care about that.
Okay.
Now, there's one final point that I think is crucial here that you're kind of understandably forgetting, which is that this is not just about the RIRs. This is supposed to be an open process. Now, the RIRs are obviously going to be leading players in anything having to do with address allocation, but you have to be open to other stakeholders. Otherwise, you will not qualify for our process, the ICG process. We will look at your proposal and we'll say, did you shut people out? Did you really have consensus? And if you just had a committee of 5 people at the NRO putting together this proposal at the top, I'm not sure if that's going to qualify.
Right. So to be clear, the committee at the top isn't supposed to put together a proposal any more than the ICG is. The regions are supposed to iterate their proposals till they line up. Okay? So just want to be clear on that. It's not supposed to be a creative effort in the integration any more than it's supposed to be at the ICG, Milton. Okay. Anybody else on global versus regional? Yes, front mic.
So first thing, Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, can I get a clarification on who Milton is speaking on behalf of? Is he speaking on behalf of the ICG as the body, or is he speaking on behalf of himself? I'm sorry, Milton, it's actually... Thank you. That clarification is important for me.
Okay.
As far as global versus regional is concerned, if we go global, which I don't agree with in this particular case, we will have a situation where decorum will get thrown out the window because of regional differences. The list will grow to a size that nobody actually wants to be on it because of the volume of chatter. So we will actually have the reverse problem. By having a complete inclusion globally, the people that you actually want to hear from, the community you want to hear from, that you want open, will be completely disinterested in participating in that situation. So I do support doing it at the regional level.
Okay. Let me ask one question.
Yes.
Are you against using a global list to integrate the regional proposals?
I am not against having a global list once
Once there's 5 straw mans.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the very last part to this was sort of part of all of this. We have to keep in mind that each country, not just region, but each country has some peculiarities. ARIN deciding as a community to pre-fill a mailing list could very well run offside of Canadian law.
Right.
So yes, submitting it out to all the lists, but starting with a fresh list is probably the appropriate way to go.
Okay. And one last question on that. There is an ARIN consult list open to anyone, which we used to hold consultations on. Could we start with that list, or you really want a fresh list for the region?
I think we should just go with a fresh list.
Okay, thank you. On the global versus regional, yes, middle mic.
Hi, Tim McGinnis here with NABP, but I'm speaking in my own personal capacity. I think that Vince's point was very valid. We already we're used to doing this regionally. I think it'll be far simpler to harmonize 5 positions rather than 500. So I would vote for a regional, and I'm agnostic about a new list or an existing list. Thank you.
Tim, can I ask a question?
Please do.
Milton, in his wisdom as an individual, but as informed as an ICG member, indicated we have a concern about openness. So would you believe that both the regional processes need to be open to anyone to participate, and the global list that's considering those 5 positions also needs to listen to new positions as they come in?
Well, I think that having experience in at least 3 different regions over the last 15 years, I understand that openness is part of the design of the RAR process, and I would assume that the consultation and discussions would be open as well. So I would have no problem with the openness about that.
Right.
And the second part of your question?
Well, specifically, you said it'd be easier to harmonize 5 proposals than it would to be 500.
Right.
But if you get 5, but 2 people also submit them, so you have 7, are you really saying we only consider 5, or are you saying we consider the 7 that we receive? The 5 that come from the RIR and anything else that's a substantial proposal that comes in?
Well, I think that they should not discount any proposals.
That's what I want to know. Okay, just want to be clear. On global versus regional, back microphone? Global versus regional, front microphone. Sorry, front microphone, Owen?
Owen DeLong, Black Lotus Communications, ARIN Advisory Council. It seems to me that the bottom-up process works and has worked well throughout the years and is the best way to do this. And I think that the regional up to global process has worked well for the global policies we have so far, and I think it's what we should follow. Having said that, it seems to me that the one thing it doesn't do well is act with a great deal of speed.
Right.
Trying to achieve any sort of useful global stakeholder representation in the time between now and some number of months before September 2015 strikes me as patently absurd. And no matter what process you use, it's just not enough time to engage a community that large in a meaningful way, distill all that input into some single useful output, and present it in a way that actually is representative of anything other than the most determined, most vocal people with the most time on their hands.
So, to respond, just to be clear, I do know that there was a direct response from NTIA in response to questions at one point that said, what happens if we're not ready? And the response was, well, we could, if you folks are not giving up, but you're still working, we can say, okay, well, let's continue for a year and keep working. My question to you is, in light of that, are you advocating that it may take a while to get a good answer? Are you saying that we intentionally slow down and presume we're going to take more time, and not try to hit the deadline of trying to have something ready for next summer?
I think this is important. I think it should be done deliberately, and I think we should ask NTA to move the deadline out to 2016 at a minimum as being a much more reasonable way to do this deliberately.
Okay, good to have. Okay, I want to have other questions on the process. By the way, we have to save 10 minutes to talk about some of the survey questions, but on process, all topics, microphones are open. Middle mic. Go ahead. Yes, that's you.
Oh, okay. Sharon again, speaking on my own capacity. I just want to make 2 points. We've discussed this. I have no problem with setting up a global mailing list. I don't even think that would be useful because that's not what we've been doing. It's okay to have the discussions within the regions, but my concern is that we don't have a process to actually effectively collect those discussions. We are saying that when we present the proposal, we want to say that this proposal received community support. It received the consensus from the community. But the process we have right now will not actually justify that, because all what we have right now is, I could ask you to, right now on the Afrinic mailing list, the one that was set up for this discussion, the only discussion you see there is announcement of what is happening. And I've been on the other mailing list, Epinic mailing list, discussions are not happening because there is nothing to discuss. So
what process do you propose to solve that problem?
Yeah, the process, what I propose is that NRO comes up with a draft of questions, similar questions that all the community will work on, and they present their response. Because that is what we do in GPDP. A team comes up with a draft, policy, and everybody discuss it from their own community, and everything goes on fine.
Right, we actually have that. That's why we're doing a survey. The questions we're asking are very similar to questions asked in the other regions based on the same basis. Literally, the questions that we're going to talk about in a moment, the survey questions, I have come and have been coordinated with the other RIRs. They were part of the presentation at AP-NIC. They were asked in the right, so we are working on a common basis of questions.
Okay, so but we haven't seen the process with which you use in actually bringing these questions together and representing it to the community. That is what we need to, the NRO needs to come up with the complete process. Don't put the community in suspense. You're putting us in suspense by not presenting all the process from the beginning. Present all the process for us, let us comment on it, let us agree on it, then we'll continue. You've just told me now that the questions are going to be the same. I didn't know this before. It was not written anywhere on the NRO website. There's going to be the same questions that will be sent.
And that process that the NRO has to give you for how this is going to come together, we actually didn't want to come up with and just say, this is it, congratulations. We actually wanted to have a few of these meetings and get input on that process. And we've gotten good input, and now we'll come back with how to integrate these together.
But where is the process? This is not a process you just...
This is only the ARIN region. This is only the ARIN region. Okay, back microphone.
John, I think what I want to say, I'm going to repeat myself again. I think we're missing, we're not starting this thing from the top.
Sorry, repeat?
We are missing the global part of this, which is we need to present a global process first. Because this is not the manner with which we normally use. Let us understand what NRO is going to use, what process you're going to use to collect this, to bring together this survey responses. Are you going to get a team of people from each community to look at it and come up with a final draft? These are the things that we need to know from the beginning. Is there going to be, what is the timeline to when the draft will be presented back to the community and where the community will make comments, et cetera, et cetera? Are
you proposing that we put the ARIN regional process on hold until that's available?
Yes, please.
Okay,
thank you.
Back microphone.
Mark Lindsay, Avenue 4. I'm going to hit you from the other side, right? So the question I have here is the ARIN community is a consistent group, but what are you going to do to reach out to those who aren't regular participants in the ARIN community? Because as Milton points out, there are stakeholders who aren't regularly involved in this process, who may have some comment on what the switch and the transition might look like. So what is ARIN going to try to do to get more participants than those who are typically on the consult list, or the PPML list, or whatever it is?
So I gave this presentation to talk about the IANA changes going on. I've given this presentation at NANOG earlier this week, many of whom are ARIN members, but many of whom are not ARIN members. We've given several presentations. I'm on the road 4 or 5 times this year in various forums, like, for example, at PTC, Pacific Telecom Council, we presented and informed them all there's an IANA stewardship activity. Many of the RIRs are doing outreach outside of their RIRs saying there's an IANA transition stewardship planning process going on and that people need to get involved. But other than announcing it so that people know it's open and they can get involved, I don't know what else you're asking for.
Well, no, I think first of all, to have a commitment as a part of the process to include those who aren't typically a part of the ARIN community, that ought to be a part of the obligation to think creatively about how do you contact those individuals to get them to participate on the mailing list.
Right.
And having that as a formal part of the process internally is to gather that from within the region and not necessarily within the ARIN community alone.
This is for the region, not the ARIN community alone.
I know. I'm saying, can you have a bullet item that says part of our obligation will be to proactively get and continue to do what you're doing? You say you're doing it. I appreciate that.
Right.
But proactively say that's a part of our process to gather more.
Acknowledged. I think it's worth acknowledging that. Okay, last couple of questions on the ARIN region process. I got Bill at the middle mic. Go ahead.
As sympathetic as I am to our Afrinix colleagues' assertion that we should look before we leap and have some sort of plan for how we're going to globally coordinate, I have to be a little pessimistic on this one and say that I think the chances of us coming to any convergence on a global coordination mechanism before it's overtaken by events are 0. So if we want to have something to say and we want to be heard, we have to just go ahead and do it. That if we wait until we all agree on how we're going to come to agreement, it'll be too late.
Okay, center front.
John Springer, Inland Telephone, ARIN AC, speaking as myself. So one component of what the NTIA said this must be is bottom up. And the
Right.
bottom is here. The bottom is not in a new global mailing list somewhere else. Second of all, the ARIN staff is going to be the secretariat of this process here, correct?
Correct.
That's a little top-downish itself right there, but it's what we got.
If someone wishes to volunteer to be the secretariat for this process, come to me now, because frankly, I would be relieved.
My only point is that decisions have been taken, and we need to get a wiggle on. The NTIA statement came out in March for all of the RIRs, and we have four RIRs with statements, and we have none. Going forward, how do we run this along? We could have, asked this survey at Bellevue. We could have had it at Nanook on the road. Let's get a move on, please.
We're getting a move on. Okay, got it. I want to move on to the ARIN region questions. So, in the mailing list, next week, we're going to call all the ARIN members and say, we're going to send an email out saying, you need to survey. I'll tell Nanog, you need to answer this survey about how the IANA stewardship should be done. And we're going to ask some questions, and we're going to get responses. And those responses are what you people are going to be looking at 2 weeks from now, trying to craft text based on the answers and how the survey felt. So it is crucial that questions you want to see answered, I hear about. Now, I'm taking questions that match some of the materials that the other RIRs have done, okay? And I now need feedback as to what we're actually going to survey people on next week. Do you want to not ask questions? Are there questions you don't see? Let me talk about the ARIN survey questions. There are 3 of them. And we would normally poll these, and it would be yes, no, or any comments for each of these. So the first question we send to the community is, do you agree with the following points of the primary priorities for the ARIN community with respect to the IANA stewardship transition planning? There should be minimal operational change. The current processes for the IANA operation and related policymaking are effective and allow the participation of all interested parties. Any new oversight mechanism should incorporate and build upon existing RIR community policymaking processes, and the RIR community is ultimately accountable for the management of those IANA functions related to the management of global internet number resource pools, and this should be reflected in any new oversight mechanisms. That's question 1. Also, what I want to know, is that a good question to ask? Does that question need to be broken up in any way? Because you have yes for part of it and no for other parts. Question, right, I heard that on the list, and I'm going to ask people to come to the mic and talk about it. Question 2, do you agree that the model for IANA oversight endorsed by the ARIN community should include the following elements? ICANN has historically managed the operation of the IANA functions well, should continue to do so at this time. The IANA functions operator must be answerable and accountable to the community it serves. The number resource community is represented in such accountability processes by the membership-based regional registry organizations. Funding arrangements to cover staff, equipment, and other operational costs associated with the operation of the IANA function should be transparent and stable. Same question. Is this a good question to ask to feel if you guys think yes or no? Should it be broken up into pieces, 1 piece, 2 pieces, many pieces? Last question, does the community feel it has no position per se on ICANN accountability mechanisms aside from the IANA? So we're not talking about IANA accountability, we're talking about ICANN and all of its other joy dealing with DNS, i.e. other than the principle that the DNS community must be satisfied with any process before an ICANN transition. Whatever ICANN comes up with accountability has to meet the DNS community's requirements. We don't have requirements. Is this a good question to ask or not? We have 3 questions. We have we're 26 minutes over for time. I'm going to take 5 or 10 minutes to get feedback on these questions, and then we're going to break for lunch. Microphones are open on the ARIN survey questions. Back microphone. You missed it, Matt.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. I think the ARIN community has a hard time with omnibus proposals, let alone omnibus questions.
Okay.
So.
Do you not think we should do a survey?
No, I'm very happy with the survey. All I was going to suggest was For all of these bullet points, it should be a yes to all on the question, yes to each bullet point, or you can selectively remove out your support, or you could have no support. But each bullet point should be separated out. Otherwise, you're in omnibus scenario, and I don't think you'll get the results that is good for the community.
Break them all out. Got it. Yes. Front.
I was going to say, you do a wonderful job when doing votes of being very clear and specific. Please apply that same logic to your survey questions here. I would also ask, for in terms of survey questions, is there any thought towards the forward-moving, how do we change the governance model going forward? We seem to be looking at kind of how do we cast something in concrete, and we're not asking about what methodology might be used for iterating or evolving this in the future. Is that out of scope for this?
So you want an open-ended question to the effect of, are there any structural changes in the model for stewardship of the IANA that should take place? Free-form box, and we'll aggregate all of those in the survey response.
Awesome, thank you.
Got it, okay. Middle microphone.
Jason Schiller, Google, ASOAC. I think it's covered in these questions when I read between the lines carefully, but I would like it more explicitly stated. I think questions 1 and 2 do cover that this community should specify the SLAs that are measured for IANA services and specify how they are measured, and that the results of such measurements should be reported back to this community.
Okay.
And if those SLA measurements need to be moved at some point in the future, that this community be the ones to do it.
So
I think that's covered in questions 1 and 2, but not explicit.
I could create an omnibus question 4 that said, with respect to SLAs, do you believe the following, A, B, C, and D? But I'll save time before Matt jumps to the mic or Kevin. Can that be an omnibus question, or do you need to break out those points individually?
I think in general, you just make these all separate questions that are grouped together under a like topic.
Okay.
And
Thank
let
you.
people tick off yes, no, I don't know, whatever.
Okay. I am closing the microphones, so if you have comments, approach a queue quickly. Front and center.
Owen DeLong, Black Lotus Communications, ARIN AC. I think that these are good starting questions. I think question 3 needs a free-form box of if you said no, what opinion do you feel we have, or some other way of, saying. A no answer needs explanation.
Correct.
Or it's kind of useless. And I do support breaking all of them out into individual answers, because there are many cases in the questions where I would answer yes to some and no to others.
Okay, thank you. Last queues are closing. Approach the queues. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Last speaker, Mr. Milton Mueller.
I get the last word, John. Tremble. Yeah, this survey is, in my opinion, a complete farce. I think it's a textbook case of how to manipulate public opinion, and you people have the temerity to talk about a bottom-up process. What you've done is you've worked out your principles, you've worked out what you want, and then you put a bunch of questions in front of the community that say, do you agree with this?
So we have difference of opinion. We have people saying that we should get a list of questions and then use those to help get alignment between the RIRs and
Well, I don't understand why you need to do a survey at all.
Okay,
If you
so
want to,
that's
if you
my
want to have a
question.
process, just let people put forward the questions that they think are important
Right. So-
in an unconstrained manner. And then, you see, what you're going to do is you're going to get naturally, you're going to get the responses, and most of the people who respond will be the people in the community who agree with you. And then you'll say, look at this, 40% of ARIN people agree with our position on this. And, I mean, that's just a totally
let me-
top-down manipulated
ask,
process.
Let me ask 2 questions, because the first question I asked is someone, should we do a survey at all? And most people have said, yes, do a survey.
No,
I would,
Did they?
well, that's the question. I asked people, do you want to do a survey? 2 speakers both said yes.
Two speakers,
Do you
yeah.
believe
Here's one that's
if the
saying no.
questions have a slant, the answer to that would be to add other questions, okay, that don't have a position, or to alter these questions? Can you propose changes to them to make them more neutral?
I could propose changes to the end till the cows come home. Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
would you do so now? Because
Now?
well, so
Thought we were
this
out of
question,
time.
I have another question, Belton, which is, One of the things that helps get a proposal from the region is to actually be able to gauge how the community feels about some of these issues, or maybe other issues. Maybe you have other questions you'd like to know how the community feels.
Yeah.
It's impossible on a mailing list to gauge overall community support. All you can see is messages per minute from people. Okay, that doesn't give you a poll or a measure or a show of support. So my question would be, short of a survey,
I yield
how
my
would we
time
build
to
those
Mr.
positions? What? Milton, short of a survey, how do we give the community faith that its starting point is backed by this community?
You could start out with the criteria submitted by the NTIA as to what the IANA transition has to do, and you could say, how should we accomplish this?
And take free-form input from everyone.
Yeah.
Shall we just make that question 5? Is that what you want?
No, I want to get rid of the other questions.
I'm sorry, repeat? I mean, I'm trying to accommodate your requirement. This isn't a proposal, this is a set of questions, and they can be rephrased to be more neutral if that's what you want, or whatever you think the objection is to them.
I'm sure Milton would be willing to summarize all the responses into one nice, concise one.
Okay, Kevin, back rear microphone.
Just very quickly, just to maybe help Milton out, can we just do a show of hands, John, on the survey question?
So, are you asking on the survey questions or whether we should have a survey or not?
Yes, the first, whether we're going to have a survey or not.
Survey based on this set of questions.
Correct.
Could we have presuming we break up the questions and we add the free-form box as requested, we add a set of questions for SLA as noted by Jason. Does this community believe that a survey sent out to the community that's open to everyone, not just ARIN members, but NANOG, anyone who answers the survey, would be helpful in forming a response? If so, raise your hand. Nice and high. Okay, I don't know whether we need to tabulate this. Take it down. How many people believe it would be a farce? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're going to proceed with the survey, folks, because most of you think it's a good idea. And you can take the output, and if you think it's a farce, not use it in your responses to the regional list that we set up for this purpose. If you think it's useful value in submitting your suggestions, then consider the survey responses, okay? Yes?
Jason Schiller, Google. Rather than characterizing it as a farce, could we just ask how many people think a survey would not be helpful?
Jason, it was overwhelming, okay? Don't worry, sit down, thank you. Middle microphone.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, ARIN AC. With all respect to Milton, I do understand his issue. We earlier talked about we were trying to model this on the policy development process, et cetera, et cetera. Our policy development process is a very important thing. It's the problem statement. So when we're considering policy, we have try to have a clear problem statement that for what we're considering. That's what the survey is trying to consolidate something into something that people can react to. Because otherwise I fear we're going to end up with a blank piece of paper.
Okay. We are now 5 minutes past break for the 30-minute late lunch. Center front microphone.
I just have to, Scott Librand, ARIN AC, I just have to support what Jason said. I think the characterization of the no response to that question of it's useful as it being a farce was inappropriate.
Okay.
And I believe that if the community does believe we need a survey, which probably is true, I believe there is definitely some work to be done on making sure that the survey questions are not leading, which I believe is the primary concern that Milton has addressed, and I would advise you to do that before the survey goes out.
Right, so Milton's concern was a survey taking place at all, more than the phrasing of the questions. But noting 2 objections now, can I get the polling engine set up, please? Pollsters, get ready. On the matter of whether or not ARIN will conduct a survey based on the questions presented, broken out into individual items, and adding the SLA requirements, I'd like to have a formal poll. This includes the remote participants. What? Free-form. And a free-form question as required for any other changes to the system. I would like a show of hands. I'm going to ask everyone in favor and everyone opposed. This includes everyone in the room and remote participants. All those in favor, raise your hand. Nice and high. All those in favor of conducting a survey Based on those questions, broken out to individual questions, with questions added for SLA, and a free-form question as requested by Matt, raise your hand. Please keep your hands high. We need to allow time for the remote participants. Keep your hands high. Are we good? Thank you. Okay. Everyone opposed, raise your hand. Nice and high. Remote participants as well? Got it? Thank you. We'll get the survey results. Okay, Sean, go ahead while we're waiting for the results.
Sean Kennedy, XO. So the one thing I did want to say is I think that some of this debate is valuable, but it's also valuable to get the process moving forward. So I think we can move forward with whether we go with the survey or not, and with getting a mailing list going, get community input, debate the process, debate the processes with IRRs, bring back any edited responses and stuff together and debate it. If we keep discussing the process forever, I think we'll just end up delaying the whole point of this, which is to get the community input. So
Excellent.
that's what we should focus on.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I'd now like to close this, and we have the survey results coming. Okay, so on the matter of whether or not we proceed with the survey, number in the room, 165 plus 7 remote, 172. Those in favor, 56. Those against, 8. We shall proceed with the survey. Okay, we're now going to have lunch. We're running a little late. If we were to stay on our normal schedule, you would have a wonderful 52 minutes for lunch. We need to do a little better than that. So we're going to resume at 1:45. That's 15 minutes later than scheduled. 1:45, that means everyone, you have just over an hour. I will see you back here at 1:45. Oh, lunch table topics. When you go to lunch, you will see signs up for various lunch table topics. People who want to talk about those, find the appropriate sign, and you'll have a fun discussion at lunch.